just before Morag comes up, I'm going to read the passage. Okay, so today's reading is taken from Hebrews. It's chapter 6, and we're beginning at verse 9. If you've got a church Bible, you can look at page 1204. Even though we speak like this, dear friends, we are convinced of better things in your case, the things that have to do with salvation. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. We want each of you to show this same diligence to the very end, so that what you hope for may be fully realized. We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. And so, after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. People swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, he who have fled to take hold of the hope see before us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner, Jesus, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to, I learnt from Jo, I think she used this one. It's the old eyes, need the words a bit closer. If you've been coming to church for the last few weeks, you might remember that we're spending some time in the book of Hebrews. And this morning we find ourselves almost halfway through the book and the latter half of chapter 6, and thanks to Dan for reading it for us. Before we get into that, I just wanted to perhaps dispel a bit of a myth that those of us that stand up the front and sometimes speak or lead have it all together. I mean, obviously Dave does, but I mean the rest of us. And that you'll see me standing up here today, and I've put my best skirt on, and I've put some makeup on too today because, that's just what you need to do coming to church on a Sunday, and particularly when you're up the front. And that might suggest to you that this is an easy thing for me to do, and that if I'm up here, that it hasn't been a struggle. And I want to say that actually the last few days have just felt like an absolute battle for me. On Friday afternoon, I was at Malcolm Maria's in tears with bits of paper everywhere. This word had been sort of mulling and, over in my heart and in my mind over the weeks, and I just could not get it down on paper. And I felt so close to giving up. And those of you that know me, maybe those of you that have listened to some of the things that I've said before, probably will sort of have a sense of this sort of weave of story of anxiety in my life, and that's definitely something that I have struggled with and continue to struggle with even now. And the last few days, I'm back in it, and I'm just feeling absolutely crippled, and it is just the horriblest place to be. And I have to say thank you and sorry to my husband and to my children and to my friends who put up with my tears and have to listen to the same thing again and again. I can't do this. I'm not good enough. what is God going to say through me? I'm not as good as this person, and all of those things that come in to my mind. And I just wanted to share that this morning because I woke up this morning and the sort of words that just kept going through my head were, this is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. And it doesn't feel very victorious in many ways. And it feels really hard. But I could have, and I very nearly did, ring Malcolm 2 or 3 times this weekend and just say, I'm really sorry, I just cannot do this. I cannot stand up the front. I do not know what I'm going to say. You're just going to have to do it. And we all know that Malcolm could have stood up and shared something for us. But the bit of me that always wants to fight through, the bit of me that wants to prove that actually I can do this and I don't want to be scared all the time and I'm going to push forward, was rallied by people who prayed for me, who held my hand, who gave me hugs, who made me cups of tea, who talked me down again and brought me to this place. That is how I fight my battles. I fight my battles not on my own. I fight my battles with those around me by being real about the things that really impact me. And so when you see me standing up here, and I hope I'm going to do a good enough job, and it will be what it will be, and take from it what you can, this has been a battle for me. But I'm here today because people have prayed for me, and I really believe that God has put something on my heart. And I'm definitely not a preacher. But I do love Jesus, and I really love the Bible, and I really love you guys, and I love to encourage people. And the enemy would have loved for me to say no and to have just given up and not pushed through, and that is not a place I want to be. And I just want to share that with you before we start, because I wonder for some of you whether you sometimes feel like that, or whether when you come to church you can see some of us who get up and maybe we're put on a bit of a pedestal, or you feel like, well, I can never do what they do. And I just want to encourage you that whatever it is that you do, and whether it's difficult, that, you know, we're all fighting our battles, and let's come to church and be real with one another, and let's reach out for one another, and let's get prayer when we need it, and let's get hugs when we need them, and we don't have to do this alone. This is how we fight our battles. That isn't my talk. Maybe I should stop there. Right, so with all that said, let's just put something of the context of what we're speaking about this morning. We're in Hebrews. We don't know who wrote it. There's some ideas, aren't there? But we don't know entirely who wrote it. But we do know that it was written after Jesus had lived, after he had died, after he had ascended to heaven. So in terms of the sort of the big arc of salvation history, and we're thinking about the Bible timeline, that positions us sort of alongside the Hebrews. We're in that same part of history with them, post-Jesus in a sense, on earth. And we know that it's written to Jesus-believing Jews, and we've seen that Hebrews is packed with a huge amount of information, and it's been noted in a way that it's been structured, that it alternates between teaching, so reviews of Israel's history or the temple worship, followed by some challenges on those teachings. And we've maybe begun to see the overarching goal of the book, which is to show the superiority of the new covenant. That is the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises through Jesus over the temporary first covenant that God made with Abraham back in Genesis. In essence, what Hebrews is saying is, in the past, God did this, he did it through this, but now look, here's Jesus, and he's even better than that. And this is how that truth can make and should make a difference in your life. Malcolm introduced us to the acronym GOAT, if you remember right at the beginning of the series. Greatest of all time, not the woolly bleaty kind, but the greatest of all time. Who is the greatest of all time? Hebrews keeps pointing us to Jesus. It can feel hard sometimes to be challenged. Perhaps we can feel like we're being told off or that we're not good enough. But I think as I've read Hebrews over and over again, it doesn't feel like a harsh book to me, but rather one of deep encouragement. It's written in a warm tone by someone who is seeking to communicate God's truth in order to build its readers up and spur them on. And this morning, as we look at these few verses together and ponder what it means for us to have Jesus as our ultimate hope and anchor, my prayer is that we will also be built up and encouraged a little more in our faith this morning. So, without further ado, let's zoom in to the main verses that will kick us off this morning. Maybe the next slide, thank you. And I love the New Living Translation, so Dan read the reading this morning in the NIV, our church Bibles, but for me it's the New Living Translation. So here it is. Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain into God's inner sanctuary. Perhaps just take a moment and let those words sit with you. Just notice the impact on them as you read them. I wonder what stands out for you. What is it that you need to hear from them this morning? Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain into God's inner sanctuary. When I first read those verses, it was the image of the strong and trustworthy anchor that first struck a chord with me. So I just want to take a few minutes for us to consider what an anchor is and what it does. So we've maybe got another slide. Who'd have thought there could be so many anchors? I did a little Google search, started to get a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of information about anchors. Thought of a few of you in the congregation who probably would have loved to know all of the intricate facts about them. But I just need to know the basics. And so for me, at the most basic level, what is an anchor and what does it do? Well, it's normally made of metal and it's a device for keeping a vessel in one place. An anchor is secured to the movable object, so a boat, for instance, with a chain or cable, and then lowered or attached to an immovable object, the seabed, to hold the vessel in place by digging into the seafloor with its pointed projections, and you can see all the different ones there. Anchors are used to combat wind and currents and that want to move the vessel, of course. They can be temporary, like those that we find on boats and ships, or permanent, like those used on oil rigs. And the chain that connects the anchor to the ship is usually of heavy construction with a breaking strength much higher than required. But despite the evolution in anchors over the years, these man-made devices aren't infallible. Anchors have been known to fail, and the vessels that they were meant to be securing have run into trouble. And here's just one quick news report during the pandemic. Cruise ships anchored off the south coast during the coronavirus pandemic have suffered anchor losses, it was revealed. Vast vessels which would normally be sailing the Caribbean and the Mediterranean, packed with thousands of passengers, have instead been sitting off Britain's shores, unable to be put to sea. Some have apparently lost anchors while sheltering from storms. During this period, there were several anchor losses associated with the inclement weather over the autumn and winter, and the use of the anchoring equipment beyond its intended design parameters. So maybe just hold some of those things in mind, but after we've looked at those fascinating points about anchors, let's just, their role and their limitations, let's just take ourselves back to Hebrews. And we're just going to ask, very simply, these three questions. Why did the readers of Hebrews need an anchor, and why do we? What is the anchor the writer is talking about, and how can we be sure it will hold? And if Jesus is our ultimate hope and anchor, what difference does that make in our lives? So firstly, and I think there's a slide, Chris, thanks. Why did the readers of Hebrews need an anchor, and why do we? Well, we said that the letter of Hebrews is written to Jewish Christians, and it seems that it was there to warn them a bit against drifting away. We see in chapter 2 of verse 1, it says, "So we must listen very carefully to the truth we have heard, or we may drift away from it." And we've read in chapter 5 and the early part of chapter 6 that there's something about them being believers for a long time, and perhaps they were a bit prone to complacency and indifference. Maybe they were sort of failing to grab with two hands the truth of who Jesus is and what he has done. And then we see, if we just move forward a little bit into chapter 10, that they've faced persecution in the past, and possibly they're under pressure again to revert back to Jewish teachings once more. So verses 32 and to 36 of chapter 10 says, "Think back on those early days when you first learned about Christ. Remember how you remained faithful even though it meant terrible suffering. Sometimes you were exposed to public ridicule and were beaten, and sometimes you helped others who were suffering the same things. You suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, and when all you owned was taken from you, you accepted it with joy. You knew that there were better things waiting for you that will last forever. So do not throw away this confident trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings you." So given the language of today's verses, we can perhaps just for a moment imagine the readers of Hebrews as boats. Some of them at risk perhaps of being unmoored or untethered. Maybe they were feeling lost at sea, or maybe they were in the midst of a massive storm and feeling absolutely battered. I wonder if you can relate. Can you take just a moment to locate yourself? If you imagined yourself as a boat right now, where would you be? Are you in the midst of a storm? Have you drifted out to sea either willfully or unwittingly? Where are you? I've never faced persecution like the Hebrews, the readers of the Hebrews did, and if I'm really honest about it, the thought of it absolutely terrifies me. But a few months ago, someone I'd been good friends with for a long time took me to task on my Christian beliefs and decided that she couldn't be friends with me anymore. And I was left feeling really attacked and really vulnerable. And that left me questioning myself and whether what I believed was really true. And I think that's what persecution ultimately seeks to do. It seeks to strip us of all of our certainties, to make us question our beliefs. And I wonder if that's what some of the readers of the Hebrews felt like, as they felt pressure from the arguments of the non-believing Jews. Perhaps they were tempted to go back to their old ways of thinking. Wouldn't it be easier? It reminds me of the Israelites having been led out of slavery in Egypt, and as things got tough in the wilderness, they started to grumble and complain and to look backwards rather than forwards. "We would be better to go back to Egypt," they complained to Moses. They were quick to forget what they had been rescued from. They took their eyes off the hope that was in front of them. Something the readers of Hebrews, I think, were also in danger of doing. And I think something that we can be in danger of doing too as we live as exiles in this world. The readers of Hebrews needed an anchor to hold them steady, to keep them on course as they waited for the better things that lay ahead and that would last forever. And we need one too. So what is the anchor that the writer is talking about, and how can we be sure it will hold? Well, for me, Hebrews shows us that Jesus and the hope that we have in him is our ultimate anchor. Jesus is the ultimate anchor. An anchor that has stood the test of time and that can never be broken, unlike the strongest of man-made devices, as we've seen. I love the Message translation that describes it as an unbreakable spiritual lifeline. The wonderful truth of the Bible is that Jesus has overcome the stormiest of storms and defeated the devil's schemes, and he has now, as Hebrews 8 and verse 1 tells us, sat down in the place of honour beside the throne of the majestic God in heaven. In anchoring terms, we are the movable object, and our hope in Jesus and what he has done anchors us to the immovable object, which is, as we saw in our verses, God's inner sanctuary, or the place where God resides. In Temple Talk, as Dave showed us last week, it was known as the Holy of Holies, a space that was so sacred that only the high priest could go in there, and only once a year. Jesus has changed all of that. Hebrews 4, verses 14 to 16. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God, and there we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. God made us to be in relationship with him, and he is our ultimate goal, our resting place, our place of refuge. And I imagine myself as a little boat out here somewhere, and God over here, and I was going to try and draw a picture, but it wouldn't have looked very good. And just of Jesus with his arms outstretched. And he is holding on to me. I am the movable object. My soul drifts around all over the place. And he reaches into the Holy of Holies to where God is. He is that unbreakable chain. He is that lifeline that cannot be broken. He is the anchor that keeps us grounded and on course. I don't know about you, but I yearn for that place. I'm constantly looking for safety, internal safety, an internal sense of security. In psychological terms, we think about it as the search for the secure base, that place where we feel most at home. Psalm 90 and verse 1, one of my favourite verses in the Bible. Lord, through all the generations you have been our home. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. They speak of our real home, and they tell us that God does not change and that there is no one greater than God. A point that the writer to the Hebrews also makes, as we read earlier in the chapter from verse 17 onwards. God also bound himself with an oath, so that those who receive the promise could be perfectly sure that he would never change his mind. So God has given both his promise and his oath. These two things are unchangeable because it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore, we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. God's faithfulness to his promises throughout Scripture and ultimately through his Son Jesus is the truth we cling to, giving us the hope and the confidence we need through the challenges and storms of this life. Jesus is our ultimate hope and the anchor for our souls. So if Jesus is our ultimate hope and anchor, what difference does that make in our lives? Well, I wonder, what difference does it make in your life? As I've shared something of some of the struggles that I can face and have even faced over the last few days, and certainly over the last few months, as there's been this unsettling for me with this friend of mine. Over the last few months, these verses have acted a bit like a weighted blanket for me. We were talking about these in our Monday Bible study, and it just reminded me of that. I don't know if you know what a weighted blanket is. Maybe some of you have got one. They're these sort of fairly newfangled things. They're these blankets that are filled with, glass balls or metal, like ball bearings, and the idea behind them is that the extra pressure sort of reduces anxiety, that it works on the nervous system, calming us down, giving us a sense of safety, and then ultimately it helps to stimulate sleep. Now, I'm not saying we should all just fall asleep, But for me, it's about being able to relax and rest in the promise that Jesus has done all that he needed to do to make me right with God. And as we met as a group of those of us who are delivering this sermon series, and we'd begun looking at Hebrews, and we were in the first stages of it, we'd been reading through it, and people were talking about the different things that sort of jumped out to them. And the great thing about being in a group with people who are so different is that we've all got different things. And I was beginning to feel a little bit overwhelmed, as I often do, about just the amount of information and commentaries, and what does this mean and what does that mean. And I could feel myself internally just freaking out and just thinking, why am I here? I cannot do this. Too much information for me. Need it simple. And as I was just flicking through, thinking, I don't know what I'm going to say here, I don't think I should be here, it was these verses that really just jumped out to me. And for me, it was just like the weight just of that, just wonderful sense of, for me, this is what Hebrews is about. For me, this is about knowing that I am tossed around all over the place, that my soul is restless and, is never going to find its home until it finds its rest in God. And here's the answer to that. And so what I bring to you this morning comes out of something that I have really needed to hear for myself and will continue to need to hear. These verses are like a weighted blanket for me. They give me a place to rest and relax. So when life gets difficult, when people turn on me maybe because I love Jesus, or when I start to doubt myself, he is a strong and trustworthy anchor for my soul. There is nothing I can do to earn my way into heaven. Whatever life throws at me, I am ultimately safe in him. Do you need rest for your soul this morning? Try allowing the weighty truth of these words to calm you and give you peace. But there is also a call to action in these verses. So we can't just stay as passive recipients, as lovely as that would be. And I think there's periods of our lives and seasons in our lives when actually that's what we do. That's all we can do. And we just rest in God and we receive his grace and mercy. But I think we could then be in danger of falling asleep and perhaps becoming indifferent, just like we've seen the early readers of this letter to the Hebrews were. They'd become a bit indifferent, a bit complacent at times. They were not really engaging with God's word and the truth of that. So as much as our hope in Jesus holds and anchors us, we need to hold on to it. It's constantly this sense of, of us, we have to hold on. God holds us, and there's nothing we don't need to do anything about that except ask and accept Jesus into our lives. God does that work for us, and yet we have to receive it and we have to keep holding on to it. So as much as our hope in Jesus holds and anchors us, we need to hold on to it. So there's intention in that, and I think this is where some of the challenge lies. And as we've looked a little bit at Hebrews, listen carefully. Don't harden your hearts. Keep engaging with the truth of Jesus and grow in maturity. Don't just keep drinking milk, as Dave was talking about last week. We need to be on solid food. Growing in maturity. So there's things that we need to do, and as I said right at the beginning, we can't really do those things on our own. We have to, we need each other. We need each other, which is why I just love coming to church. I feel like the Lord's given me just this year even just a really renewed sense of love for my church and for being here, because I know that I need it and I need that encouragement. So Hebrews 10 verses 23 to 25 says, "Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promises. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but let's encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." My prayer for you this morning is that you will have come and that you will feel encouraged this morning, not from the things that I've said, but from the truth of God's word, and that you would know something more today and in the week ahead of what it means for Jesus to be your hope and your anchor. Amen.